I challenged the two of you a little bit today because nobody knows more about conventions than the two of you do. And I said, go back and find me someone coming in her position who had to do something similar, who had a wound, but had to come in and make the case, be cheerleader-in-chief, as someone wrote, for the candidate. And George, who'd you pick?
Well, mine comes from a man we heard so much from last night, Ted Kennedy. We've seen those last 3 lines from his 1980 speech. What you often don't see is this one line.
I congratulate President Carter on his victory here.
No cheerleader, Ted Kennedy. That was about a 3,500-word speech.
That was
Those
it?
were the only words about President Carter in that speech in 1980. And, of course, President Carter lost in 1980. Divided parties lose. Sore losers can make the difference for winning and losing for the nominees.
Yes, when you looked at that convention, Jimmy Carter, the incumbent who had defeated Teddy Kennedy in the primaries, standing on the stage waiting for Kennedy to come at a very slow pace as the Kennedy motorcade went through New York. You had the feeling that here was the president of the United States as sort of the supplicant to the guy that he'd beaten.
Yeah, Teddy Kennedy did not seem like he wanted Jimmy Carter to win in 1980.
Well, Matt, you had a familiar face who had a similar job to do.
Yeah, something closer to home that I was more familiar with. In 2000, John McCain and George Bush had a bitter primary. It was a shorter bitter primary than this one, but it was a very bitter primary. No chemistry between them. John McCain didn't like George W. Bush at the end of it. All his staff questioned it. They didn't want to support him. And then he gave a speech at the convention, which throughout the speech, he showed and he tried to prove that George Bush was prepared to be commander-in-chief. And he even brought up his family's military background, George Bush's father, John McCain's military background. And at the end of that speech, he had a quote that will show, but it was fairly strong language that he used.
I am proud to do so, for I know that by supporting George W. Bush, I serve my country well.
And by doing that, and what led to that was the whole military background was George Bush can be my commander-in-chief.
And George Bush won.
And George Bush won and was his commander-in-chief. And by John McCain doing that, which I think Hillary Clinton is in the back of her mind, set himself up for a future run for the president because he looked loyal, he looked and did what he needed to do.
But also in this general election campaign, probably set himself up to get the nomination. Now that has become the #1 talking point of Democrats going into the general election. How many times are you going to hear and see Democrats that started tonight tying George Bush and John McCain together? They'll say that John McCain voted with President Bush over the last 7 years 90% of the time.
I just have one other thing I want to raise. Okay, so we stipulate that she will do everything that the Obama campaign wants in terms of endorsing it in his speech, and that she needs, because she doesn't want to be blamed if anything goes wrong for him. But then the question is, what does she want out of all this? There was a great quote I saw today from Leon Panetta, who used to be chief of staff to Bill Clinton, and he said, the Clintons are a little like Brett Favre. Very good players, they've got a great record, but sometimes you're not sure what they want.
She may not know. You know, what you heard Terry McAuliffe, campaign chairman, say today, she doesn't want a cabinet position. I believe that. I believe she wanted the vice president slot. She didn't get that. Some people say the Supreme Court. I don't think so. I think she's got to make a choice. Does she want to be, for Democrats, the next Teddy Kennedy, or does she want to run for president again? In some ways, they're incompatible.